Joining us now on the phone, Donald Trump, old friend, real estate mogul, star of Celebrity Apprentice. How well did you know Michael, Donald?
Well, Larry, as you know, I knew him very well. He was a great guy. He was actually a very, very smart businessman. He was somebody that was very special. He lived in Trump Tower for an extended period of time in New York, and right next to me, actually, and so I got to know him very well. He would go down to Mar-a-Lago and Palm Beach a lot. In fact, that's where he was with Lisa Marie Presley when it first came out, and he was there for a very long period of time, but he would go down often.
When was the last time you spoke with him?
Probably a year ago, Larry. You know, Michael was a much different guy in the last 7 or 8 years, maybe 10 years than he was. I always view it as two Michael Jacksons.
How do you mean?
Well, you had Michael from, let's say, up till around the age of 35, and that was somebody, the greatest entertainer I've ever seen. And then you had the later version of Michael, who was much more reticent. He was much shyer. I mean, you know, he was just a little bit of a different guy.
Oh.
And I really knew both Michaels. He was a terrific guy. He was a wonderful guy. But he lost a certain amount of confidence in the last 10 years. I mean, he went through a lot, including some very, very bad doctors.
And what about the business aspect of this? Is he going to be worth a lot more gone than here?
Well, he's going to be worth a lot of money. He's got all of his albums are #1 now. I mean, he's just knocking the hell. Probably they've never seen anything like it, and I guess the debt will be paid off pretty quickly. But he really was. He was a great businessman, and I talked to him. He'd come into my apartment, and we talk a lot about business. And as an example, he met with Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney was telling him, and this is a pretty well-known story, but Michael told it to me. Paul McCartney mentioned that he was going to try and buy back the other half of the Beatles' music, and Michael then went out and bought it. Now, you could say it's not very nice, and I've heard that Paul has always been very angry at Michael for doing that, but perhaps Paul shouldn't have mentioned it. Perhaps that's just business and the way it is, but he really was a very, very good businessman and a very smart guy.
Oh, you're a sharp realtor guy, and you know Southern California. I was up at Neverland. We did a whole show from there Thursday. I never saw a property as beautiful as that. 3,000 acres. What would you do with it?
Well, I'm not sure exactly who owns it. A very good friend of mine, Tom Barrack, is very much involved.
And he was there. Their company apparently pretty much owns it.
Yeah, Tom is a brilliant guy and a wonderful friend, and he was actually somebody that helped Michael Jackson a lot over the last couple of years. But I think Tom has that. I'm just not sure what you can do it from a zoning standpoint.
Could you envision a Graceland?
Well, I could, but it's a difficult area, and you have to go through this town, and as you know, they drove him crazy. You know, the interesting thing is I've known Michael from many different standpoints, and Michael would spend a lot of time with my kids. I have beautiful kids, and at the time, like at Mar-a-Lago, and even in Trump Tower, the kids were very young. Michael would come, play with the kids. He just loved children. He was not a child molester, and I am certain of that. He loved children. He'd play with my son Eric and my son Donald, and he'd just play with them forever. He loved children, but he was not a child molester. And, you know, that whole final saga of Neverland and the police and what they did was, I think, a very, very bad part of Michael's life.
Are you coming out for the service?
They invited me today, and they've called me so many times, and I'd love to do it, Larry. I just won't be able to be there. I'd love to be there. I'd love to be with you. I'd love to be with the family, but I just won't be able to be there.
What do you make of this whole thing? There's billions of people going to watch this on television.
Well, he was a unique guy. You know, I first met him years ago when he did a concert at Madison Square Garden, and I was backstage, and I just spoke to him for a little while, and you know, he was sort of low-key, and even in those days, and that was the Thriller days, when he had that great success, and it was amazing, because I talked to him, and I'd say, there's no way that this guy is going out to that stage to perform, and then you'd see him moonwalk across the stage, and the place would go crazy, and, you know, I've had every entertainer working for me, more or less, and I've just sort of know them all. I knew Pavarotti, I knew all of the great entertainers, and I think the greatest entertainer that I've ever seen was Michael Jackson. There's never been anyone like him, and I guess Elvis was like him, and the Beatles, and, you know, there were a few every generation.
Sinatra.
But Sinatra was great. But, you know, there are very few. I mean, these people, you can count them on your hand, and Michael was one of them. And just a great guy. he took tremendous. I mean, he's just had tremendous, really difficult last 10 years. His last 10 years, he's been living in hell.
Donald, thanks so much for sharing these moments with us.
Thank you very much, Larry.
Donald Trump. Miko Brando.